So this is the overview of what I will be covering today, and it includes talking about what big feelings are, warning signs for when they come on, so what they look like, how they might show up, and some tools and tips for guiding kids in managing big feelings. I will save some time for questions at the end, probably the last 5 minutes or so, and we'll get through as many as possible. Probably won't be able to get to them all, while trying to respect all of our time. So just feel free to email with any questions that we don't get to today. So yeah, with that, we can dive right in with what are big feelings. They're pretty much what they sound like. Basically, any emotion that is so large or overwhelming that it leads to feeling out of control. By definition, they are intense emotional experiences that can be difficult for children to express, understand, and regulate, and they can really apply to any emotion, not just negative feelings. They do commonly show up in the form of anger, frustration, sadness, fear, anxiety, but they can also be things like excitement or joy or silliness that sometimes are so all-consuming and overwhelming that we can, kids can lose control. So yeah, how do we talk to kids about big feelings? So in their nature, big feelings are really confusing often for kids because they usually come on very quickly. They feel very intense and even scary. They don't come with a lot of warning signs, or at least signs that kids are able to notice at first before they kind of learn about them. And they can really lead to feeling out of control and additionally some shame, guilt, and confusion. So how do we talk to kids about big feelings? I would say one of the most important things that we can do is normalize that, everybody feels big feelings. Parents, teachers, grandparents, doctors, therapists, kind of all the people in their lives. I would even recommend sharing some personal examples can be very helpful and can kind of invite them to feel comfortable relating and sharing similar stories. Another thing I like to really preface with is that there's no such thing as a bad feeling, even if it feels bad. So no matter how big that, all feelings are, no feeling is inherently bad. And another thing that is really helpful sometimes for them to hear is that emotions actually all serve purposes. So we kind of like to explain them as communicators or messengers. And usually a big emotion is there to tell us that we don't like something going on around us or that there's some sort of need that is not being met. So for example, if a kid is jealous of their dad playing with their brother, this might be telling them there's a need for attention. Or if a kid is angry, there might be a need for softness, love, support. And one of my favorite quotes is to also strike while the iron is cold. So having a conversation like this while a meltdown is already underway is probably not going to go well, which many of us might know from experience. So it's really important to have these conversations when kids are calm, content, regulated, and really able to listen. And then the normalizing really just helps to remove shame because it's important to remember it can be very isolating to feel out of control of our emotions. And as frustrating as it is for us as adults or parents, it is very, very challenging for them. Something I see often is kids will experience a shame spiral, I like to call it, where something happens that triggers them. They have a big emotional response. They might not have a lot of coping skills yet. So they react in a big way, and then the people around them respond probably in a negative way, because if you hit your sister, you're not going to get a positive response. And then they feel shame. And I like to really look at where we can step into this cycle and kind of pause and find control. And that really is in a coping skills section. So I like to focus on the pause between feeling and reacting, because that's really where some of our control lies. I also wanted to include some visuals because these can be really helpful for increasing emotional vocabulary and just, helping them see an array of feelings that we can have. One thing that is very important to work on with kids is emotional vocabulary, because a lot of them can identify, I'm feeling bad, but what kind of bad is it? Is it sad, angry, embarrassed, rejected, anything on this list? And of course, there's more than are on this wheel. So yeah, a lot of these are available on Google. You can print them out. There's posters, charts, graphics, videos, even really great pillows that obviously are not free, but are really helpful. And, kids like having those around sometimes. So this can help make it kind of fun. And one question that we got in advance was, how do I talk to a kid who says, I hate feelings and I never want to talk about them? So my advice really is to try to make it as fun as possible. Sometimes turning it into a game. Can we throw a ball back and forth and give examples of a time we felt each feeling when we catch it? Sometimes I'll throw a ball toward a kid and they'll catch it if they felt the feeling or dodge it if they didn't, and then we'll talk about it. And also, if there's a lot of resistance, pairing it with something special can be really helpful. So maybe, staying up a little late with one or both parents to have a check-in, or talking about it while you have a special treat, or, creating quality time. Just a way for them to really understand that this is important and to feel like it's, special and prioritized. So really the most effective tool for talking about emotions, especially with younger kids, is to get creative. I'm sure some of these characters look familiar to those who have seen the Inside Out movies, one of my favorite. But giving big feelings names or characters can be helpful for a few reasons. Some of the kids I work with, we will create names for their anxiety or their anger. And not only can it make it kind of silly and fun and engaging, but it actually can be easier to talk about when we separate the emotion from who we are. Because that, really just reminds us that this is just a passing thing and it's not who we are. It's someone who visits us from time to time, like a character. Some other creative visuals that I have found to be helpful. It's really helpful to, help kids visualize their emotions as part of a whole or a sum. So one that has been popular is an emotion factory. So where different feelings are managing different assembly lines maybe. And as one situation comes up, one feeling steps in. So if they, lose a board game, maybe anger steps into the factory. A second one is a feelings volcano. Again, you can get creative with this. So maybe we're measuring how big a feeling is based on how high the lava's rising, or if the lava's rising, am I angry? If it's lowering, am I calm? Are different feelings bubbling over the top, like the smoke we see? And lastly, another favorite is like a feelings ice cream sundae. So just, the premise is feelings are like different toppings. We can get creative, have fun with this. You can even create an ice cream sundae together and add the toppings based on what they're feeling in the moment. So those are just some helpful visuals. Again, there's more than those three. You can certainly get creative. And one of my favorite visuals is a model created by Robin Gobel called the Owl, Watchdog, and Possum Brain. And what this one does is it connects our nervous system to 3 different types of animals and talks about when each of them are in control. So the first one is the owl brain, and this is like our calm state. So when our nervous system is regulated, we're calm, relaxed, ready to learn, able to focus. This is really where we want to be when we are making decisions or thinking clearly. So a child is in their owl brain when they are learning comfortably, making friends or social connections, feeling willing to try something new. And when we have a big feeling come on, we like to think that the owl brain kind of flies away and in comes the watchdog. And the watchdog brain comes on when the nervous system thinks it's in danger. So danger can mean anything from, real danger, like a scary dog is chasing me, to perceived danger of I just messed up my drawing or lost a game. Or my friend told me they don't like me anymore. And I like to tell kids to think about a dog when it is scared. It's going to bark, it's going to seem angry, it might even become violent. And the premise here is the watchdog is scared but acts scary. So when kids are in watchdog brain, they might get physical, they might have a meltdown, they might hurt themselves or others, screaming, crying. So that's kind of watchdog summarized. And there's other times where a big feeling is so overwhelming that our nervous system kind of completely shuts down. And that takes us to the possum brain, which comes out when we detect extreme danger and again, just totally shut down. So while the watchdog brain is very outwardly obvious, in the possum brain, we more turn inward. So in possum brain, kids might be retreating, withdrawing, isolating, hiding in their room crying, paralyzed with fear. It might look like sitting on the edge of a birthday party, not being able to talk to anyone because they're so overwhelmed. And we can really think of the possum and watchdog brain as internalizing versus externalizing behaviors and tendencies. So the watchdog brain really represents externalizing behavior, those outward expressions of distress and aggression, crying, hitting, defiance. The possum really represents more internalizing behaviors that are inward directed. So, expressing distress inwardly. It can be anxiety, depression, withdrawal, self-harm. And when kids are in the possum or watchdog state, they really need us, their adults, to be an owl brain to help ground them and bring them back. And this is why it is really, really important that as adults, we try our best. And I know it's hard to stay calm when they are not, which we will get to in a little bit. And now we can move on to warning signs. So while it is, of course, important for kids to be able to understand and label and identify their emotions, it's equally important for them to be able to look out for warning signs and kind of understand how they know when a big feeling is coming on or their brain, the owl brain is being threatened. So this is where we have some control and where we can kind of do some prevention, two of our favorite words. So what do we actually look out for? Oops. I like to split up warning signs for big feelings into 3 categories: the brain, the body, and behavior. And I like to tell kids that it's almost like we're playing detective, where we're going to look for signs and clues that a big feeling is coming on. So what we can look for in the body and, help them identify kind of what comes on and what changes when something triggers them. We can look for things like fist clenching, gritting our teeth, the urge to hit or kick, crying, screaming, stomach hurting, sweating, face turning red, kind of any sort of physiological change. When it comes to the brain, changes that probably occur are more thought related. So this might be racing thoughts, catastrophizing, or thinking of worst case scenario, black and white thinking, which we could do a whole other talk about, but it's all about that 0 to 100 or all or nothing thinking. So if a kid has a fight with a friend, black and white thinking would sound like, this friendship is terrible. It's always felt terrible. It always will be, kind of all one way, no gray area. It can also sound like angry thoughts in the brain, thoughts of this is so unfair, and the inability to think clearly. Those are changes in the brain that might occur when a big feeling is coming on. And lastly, behavioral changes. Those watchdog or possum behaviors are what we want to look out for: having the urge to withdraw, isolate, lashing out, crying, hitting, screaming. And one tip I have for explaining why, looking out for these signs can be helpful is explaining the biological purpose and what our brain is trying to do. And that is actually to protect us. So this can be helpful for kids to learn, just because I feel these terrible things like stomach ache or racing heart, my body's not doing anything wrong when these sensations come on. My body's actually preparing to protect me. And what's happening is my body's preparing to fight danger, whether it's real or perceived. So, shallow breathing, for example, when we can't catch our breath or we're breathing really fast and short, it comes on to try to increase oxygen to our muscles so we can run or fight. Our brain might think that the thing we're fighting is a spelling test, which is, not necessarily real danger. But the point is that our body can't really distinguish a spelling test from running from a bear chasing us. And that's why these changes in the body are coming on. Now we can jump into managing these feelings, probably the part we're all most curious about. And so what do we actually do when we notice these signs in our kids or when they notice them in themselves and the changes that come on in body, brain, and behavior? And my favorite approach is to create a toolkit. And you can write this out, draw a picture. You can even make a literal toolkit and get creative with paper or real tools or toy tools. And what I find works best here is kind of a trial and error approach of trying a bunch of different strategies that we're going to talk about and almost pulling from a kitchen sink of strategies and seeing what works or sticks for each kid. And it's not going to be the same from one kid to the next. It's mainly helpful if we can find 2 or 3 things that really work that they can practice and hone in on. So what actually goes in these kits? Again, I like to split this into brain, body, behavior so we can really address all of those changes individually. And I'm sure many of us have tried to tell a child or been told ourselves to take a deep breath or just breathe when they're having a meltdown, and it often doesn't work 9 times out of 10. There's a reason for that, which is that we usually have to calm the body before the brain can really access these tools. So we have to regulate our body in order to get back into owl brain, and only then we can use logic or the brain tools. So for body, I like to start here. 3 of my favorite tools that I've seen be very helpful. The first one is called a clench and release. It's simple. The best part is it can be done anywhere, even in a way where people can't see if they're doing it, inside their sleeves. It can be done at school or in an elevator, really anywhere. And what that consists of is you'll have kids clench their fists really hard in their whole body. They'll count slowly to 5 and then release it. and you'll have them repeat that as many times as you need. And it really just helps release energy. It uses a technique called progressive muscle relaxation, which just teaches and reminds the body the difference between tension and relaxation. Another one is box breathing, which is just a way to regulate and slow down breathing to calm the nervous system. And we really can draw out a box on paper or even trace one in midair. And you're going to trace each side of the box for 4 seconds. So when you go up for 4 seconds, you have them breathe in, across you hold, down you exhale, and across again you hold. So it's breathe in, hold, breathe out, hold. And you can repeat that as many times as needed. You can get creative with that. Kids also will trace their fingers for finger breathing, like in, hold, out, hold. You can trace a rainbow, whatever works. And then lastly, mimicking physical urges can be really helpful here. So if a kid wants to throw something, we want to find the closest way for them to mimic that action in a way that's safe. And the premise here is that their body has found a natural way of regulating, even though it might be sometimes, not safe and harmful. So it sounds silly, but hitting our sister or brother is a coping mechanism. It's not a very good one. So we try to mimic that action that their body's using to regulate as closely as we can. That might look like, hitting a stuffed animal or a blanket or a pillow, or ripping apart paper, or squeezing something safe. So really just trying to mimic that. And yes, and then the brain, this is all about challenging our thoughts. So tools we can use to help our brain are really about like editing and putting our thoughts on trial. And the first one I call reframing. And it's really just an editing of a thought to try to see it in a more positive, open, less black and white way. So maybe instead of, what if starting my new school goes terribly and I make no friends and I fail out? Can we change that to be something like, I've always made friends everywhere I've gone. I'll do my best to study and ask for help. Just finding some of that gray area and evidence for why that first thought is not true can help us to feel more in control, even though it seems small. And the premise really is that our thoughts impact how we feel, which impacts how we act. So if we can make those small changes, they can add up. Another one is challenging the black and white thinking that we talked about earlier. So noticing when our brains are doing this and just restating things. So maybe instead of school is always terrible, that's not true. I had a good day last week. It's kind of like, again, putting our thoughts on trial and helping them to search for evidence or reminding them of evidence. And lastly, one of my favorite brain tools is called scripts. It is what it sounds like. It's just creating a literal script or lines for what to say in certain situations. This can help kids feel more in control and prepared for situations that come up often, like boundary setting or friend conflict. So if there's a kid at school who's not being nice or doing something they think is funny but is hurtful, role playing a conversation with them where they can say, I know you're trying to be funny, but this makes me upset when I'd like you to please stop. And we do this all the time as adults, work meetings, hard conversations. We usually don't jump in with no plan. So it just kind of helps them have something in their back pocket. And finally, some behavioral strategies. Something I love to do with kids is create a big feelings corner or an anger corner somewhere in their living space. It can be a corner in the living room. It can even be their bed. And it's just a space that is theirs and that's private, where they're always allowed to go when they're having a big feeling. And the trick here is to have some tools prepared in this space that they can use to help regulate. So maybe that means having, objects they can rip up, like newspapers or egg cartons, fidget toys, calming music, whatever works, having it all concentrated in one space so they don't also have the mental load of, I have to pause and remember all the things that I need. Another tool that can be very helpful is called opposite action. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's about kind of tricking our brain out of a feeling. So the premise here is if you want to do something like isolate, go do the opposite and be around a trusted adult. If you're feeling sad, get out of bed and try an activity. If you're feeling fearful, approach the thing you're scared of in small steps. So kind of, easier said than done, but helping them to try their best to do that. And then finally, distraction, not to be underestimated, especially with young kids. Really, sometimes all kids need is a change in environment, some sort of reset. And this can literally, rewire their brain or help them forget about or take distance from what is going on. So these are just some of my favorite tools that can be very helpful. And finally, it is just important to kind of keep the conversation going and check in with kids regularly, maybe creating a ritual as part of the week or part of dinner giving them a space that's consistent where they have time to talk about their emotions can be very helpful. And lastly, I just listed some other resources if anyone would like to look into them further. Robin Gobel, who does the Owl Watchdog Possum Brain, has a great podcast and website. There's another great book series called What to Do and Thank You. Dahlia is sending these links in the chat as I share them. The second one is What to Do When You Grumble Too Much. It's a series by Don Huebner. There's lots of books in this series, What to Do When You Worry Too Much, When Your Brain Gets Stuck. And these workbooks are great because they're interactive, so you can do them with your child. And lastly, Dr. Becky, who I'm sure many of you have heard of, is a clinical psychologist with lots of workshops, podcasts, a lot of it's free. That is just helpful for parenting children with big emotions. So thank you so much for listening. I will try to get to as many questions as I can now. And again, if there's some questions that I don't get to, I have my email on this slide that I think Dahlia is going to paste in the chat as well. And you can feel free to, reach out with any questions that I don't get to. So I'm going to look at your questions now. Let's see. Okay. So one question that we got in advance was, how can I help my young kid who struggles with jealousy, frustration, anger, and a need to be perfect, even if we're not putting that pressure on her? And I would say something that I find to be very helpful is psychoeducation and education about jealousy and anger and perfectionism can be really helpful. So talking about how they're normal, how everybody experiences them, and how, sometimes they're representative of big feelings, actually telling us, I'm a failure if this doesn't work out, or, I'm terrible and this is all never going to work out and always going to feel this bad in the moment. I think jealousy especially is often seen as a really negative emotion, but in reality, it's, very normal. It can even be productive. So I think, normalizing can be helpful. And something else that I find works really well is I call it closing the loop. So sometimes, we're so stuck on a worry that we are going in this circle that we're not fully able to close and kind of panicking. And then when we get to the thing we're scared of, like, oh my God, I can't touch it. I've got to go, I'm just going in this back and forth. So sometimes sitting kids down and actually having them answer the question of, what if I do fail? Or what if I'm not perfect? Or what if this does go terribly? Can be really helpful, and just acknowledging, like, even if I lose this game, I'll be okay. I'll still have my family. I'll still have my friends. I can still play again, next week. Yes. So that's some thoughts there. I see another question says, how do you suggest facilitating these great techniques when I have twins and often managing both of them on my own? That's a really great question. Could probably be a talk of its own. I would say, separating, actually talking to them separately can be very helpful. I think, some of the general education can be helpful one-on-one, but chances are the thing that stands out to me here is the idea of when creating, the toolkits, their toolkits, as similar as they might be, are going to be very different. So probably, being able to highlight each of their strengths and things that work for each of them, not encouraging one to use a tool that the other's using, because that might be frustrating and might not work for them. And I think, just kind of doing your very best, as hard as it is, to acknowledge each of them and the things that work and the things that don't work. And let's see if there's anything else that I'm seeing. I think I have time for maybe one or two more. Yes, I saw, here's one about sore loser type feelings. So being a sore loser, really just comes from having a big feeling of, rejection or embarrassment or failure. So my thoughts here are to just be curious about what messages kids are telling themselves. So when they're a sore loser, we're probably seeing things like watchdog brain, where they're, flipping a board game, or they're quitting, or they're refusing to play. And a lot of times what's really going on there is, there's some sort of message they're sending themselves about, if I lose, I'm a failure, or I'm so terrible at this, or, I really can never win. I can never get this right. So just, I think, encouraging them to do some of the reframing that we talked about, and thinking of, even if I lose, that's okay. Or even if I lose, this doesn't mean X, Y, and Z. And then definitely, I think a lot of what I see with the kids that I work on is losing is really, really hard when, when you're young, when you really care about something. It's hard as adults. So for them, it's even harder. And I think it can be really shameful too, when, they do act out. So yeah, I would say reframing, helping them regulate, super important. I'm seeing that it is 12:29, so I want to respect everyone's time. And yes, thank you all so much. And I'll turn it back over to Dahlia for a minute.
There we go. So to unmute. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this 30 minutes. I'm going to just put River Psychology Group's email also in the chat in case you want to reach out to us about Julia or about anything. You can reach us here. And we really appreciate you joining us. It's been wonderful to get to spend this 30 minutes together. We'll have a link to the presentation soon, and we'll post it on the site, or can email it to anybody who didn't get to see it or would like to see it again. Thank you, everybody.